Okay, welcome to Dalinar 101. Today we're going over Holy Paladin and what you can expect from Holy Paladin in Season 2. So quickly, we're just going to go over the basics of how to heal as a Holy Paladin, and then we'll deep dive into the spells, how they work, why they work, and why we do that, okay? So, first of all, your damage rotation is Judgment, Crusader Strike, Holy Shock, Holy Prism, and Shield of the Righteous. That's how you do damage. Holy Prism, if you want to do big damage to one target, you target the target and you do damage to it. And it does a lot of damage to that one target, quote unquote, a lot. And then a little bit of healing to everyone else. If you want to do healing, multi target damage, if you want to do multi target damage with it, you target yourself. Right? So, a lot going on over here. But you'll target yourself or an ally, and then you hit it. Cooldown. Yeah. Okay. Boom. Boom. These are not nothing. Target yourself. Bam. And it hits yourself for a lot of healing and does a little bit of damage to multiple targets. Okay. That's Holy Prism. So you'll use Holy Prism as it's not a spender. It's not a builder, but it kind of is in this build of Herald Sun. It kind of is a builder. We can go into depth in that later. So it gives you air quotes holy power. It does not, but it sort of does. And then you'll be spending that holy power on Shield of the Righteous and Eternal Flame for healing if you need to. Okay. Our major healing cooldowns will be Beacon of Virtue, Divine Toll, and Avenging Wrath. You pop Avenging Wrath in conjunction with Beacon of Virtue, that means together, and you'll see health bars go up. Lots of health bar go up. We'll go into that in more detail in the later part of the video. Also, if you cast Beacon of Virtue and then Divine Toll, you need to do it in that order. If you do it in the other order, you'll get much less healing throughput. But you cast Beacon of Virtue and then Divine Toll, and health bars go up. Also, casting Divine Toll or Avenging Wrath gives you special Holy Shock, and Holy Shock will hit harder and generate more holy power. So instead of generating one holy power, it'll generate 3. Ooh, nice. You have this Blessing of Summer or Spring or Winter or Autumn. Click it every time it's on cooldown. Just click it. Always cast it on yourself. Beacon of Virtue, cast it before big damage events, not during. If you have to cast during, then do it. If there's a big damage event, people are taking lots of damage, or Mastery. If you need a defensive for yourself, Divine Protection and Divine Shield. Lay on Hands in our current talent build, which you'll find in the description, adds 30% armor, which helps you for physical damage, but can also boost the damage reduction of your tank if it's physical damage. And that's pretty much everything. Holy Light will be used intermittently when you don't have any of your instant cast abilities like Avenging Wrath, Divine Toll, Holy Shock, Holy Prism. You'll cast Holy Light, and there's a few things like Divine Favor that increase the casting time and throughput, right? Increasing the healing done. We also have lots of talents that interact with that and generating holy power. So you need holy power and you are out of range potentially or don't want to get too close, you can generate holy power by casting Holy Light. Holy Light has been buffed a lot. If you're thinking Holy Light is bad from Season 1, it has changed. It's a little bit stronger now. It's actually worth casting and doesn't cost as much mana as it used to. Actually, I think it actually costs a tiny bit more, but it's still worth it. Flash of Light has also been buffed by its healing has been increased and its mana cost has been reduced significantly. So it's actually worth casting. If you're really, really low on mana, or you want to be regenning mana in between and you're kind of in a low damage environment, you can cast Flash of Light. It's kind of sucky, but it's better than literally nothing. If you have Holy Shock that's on cooldown and you're trying to restore mana, right? You're trying to be mana efficient, you can throw out a few, Flash of Lights. Flash of Light is about half as effective, give or take. It's not exactly half as effective, but it's about half as effective. Like 75% as effective as Holy Light. Holy Shock. So, yeah. In Season 1 of War Within, I cast Flash of Light as a Holy Paladin once. So I expect to cast it at least 30 times this season. It should see some play. because it's so much cheaper to cast now. It used to be very expensive and do very little healing. So it does a little bit more healing now, so it might actually see some play, but we'll have to see. Divine Protection, Blessing Protection can be used on yourself or allies. Never cast it on the tank. Cast it on the tank, you are likely to wipe the whole group as it causes them to drop aggro. Your interrupt is Rebuke, and your AoE silence, or silence, but AoE stun is Blinding Light. And that's pretty much the deal. You know, you've got your mobility with Divine Steed and Blessing of Protection, Freedom with this build. Our movement speed is increased slightly. And that's pretty much it. Yeah. You can also cast Blessing of Sacrifice to help your tank out in really rough pulls. And I would advise, if you're casting it on your tank, to use Divine Protection at the same time, because sometimes the damage can be pretty oppressive, especially if you have a Death Knight. Almost never cast Blessing of Sacrifice. Thank you for watching. Oh yeah, cleanse, and you can cleanse. Hey, removes poisons with our talent here. We remove diseases and poisons, as well as magic effects. And that's pretty much Holy Paladin. Good luck in Season 2. Okay, now for the deep dive. Okay, so the deep dive of Holy Paladin. So in last season, Herald of the Sun was start off really strong, then Lightsmith got some buffs, and Herald of the Sun got left behind, and Lightsmith became the meta for the rest of the season. That was because of Hammer and Anvil, which has been nerfed quite a bit, and because of Tempered in Battle, which has also been nerfed quite a bit. So people are stepping away from that. Also, Holy Shock has seen an increase of healing by a lot, as well as Holy Light. So now we're seeing much more effectiveness coming out of Holy Shock and Holy Light. And so this build reflects that. Herald of the Sun has much more play with Holy Shock, has much more interaction. So being able to squeeze some usefulness out of that is really good. So let's go over that. So with Herald of the Sun, you're going to see Word of Glory changes to Eternal Flame. And the key things to note about Eternal Flame is it puts a hot on the target after it's been cast. That hot heals for about 30% of the total healing done over 16 seconds. That hot, Eternal Flame also increases its healing when cast on yourself. 25% increased HPS when cast on yourself, and there's some synergies we'll go over later of why that matters. Holy Shock is our bread and butter. Holy Shock does a great amount of healing and is a good holy power generator. So Holy Shock should be like 20% to 30% of your healing at the end of a key. It's very powerful. It's very good. And there's a lot of things that interact with it. So we'll go over those. It's one of your most frequently used abilities, and it does good damage and good healing, especially after the buffs. So some of the talents to track with Herald of the Sun or Holy Shock. And so one of them is Blessing of Anshi. Blessing of Anshi has a chance to proc every time you have a hot ability that goes off, and you have two hots as Herald of the Sun. You have your Dawn Light and you have your Eternal Flame. So you have two chances to proc some passive healing, which will proc Blessing of Anshi, increases the damage or healing of your next Holy Shock by 200%. Right, so that makes your Holy Shock do over 1 million healing. Right, really good. And if it crits, you know, that's like 2-3 million healing. That's really solid. That's, you know, a good of your average DPS or you know healer, your average player that's not a tank. That's like 30% of their thing, right? 30% health with one shot. Pretty good. So yeah. The other thing to keep track of is Rising Sunlight. Rising Sunlight is an ability that is you get. It's a buff you get after you cast either Avenging Wrath, Avenging Crusader, or Divine Toll. And you get 2 stacks of Rising Sunlight, and it makes your next Holy Shock cast 3 times instead of once. Right, so you get 3 Holy Power. Look, watch this. Look at my Holy Power. 1, 2, 3. You get 3 Holy Power instead of 1, so you get way more Holy Power, and you're casting it 3 times, so you're doing three times the amount of healing. There's some stuff that can proc when you cast Holy Shock and you crit, so you have, you know, 3 times more likely to crit, right? So really good. I would suggest having a Weak Aura to track Blessing of Anshi or Rising Sunlight, just because they don't last very long. Blessing of Anshi lasts 20 seconds, and Rising Sunlight lasts 30 seconds. So they can fall off, and they don't stack. Blessing of Rising Sunlight does stack, I believe. Let's look at that. Yeah, you can have up to 4 stacks of Rising Sunlight, but you cannot have multiple stacks of Blessing Chi, just the one. So if you don't use it, it's gone forever, gone forever. It just, you know, falls off. Or if you proc it again, it's just gone. Oh, it overrides. Another thing that's important to note in your damage rotation is that Holy Shock's cooldown is reduced by Crusader Strike by 2 seconds, right? So if you're casting your damage rotation, then you get your healing rotation back faster. So you're encouraged to do damage. Something you'll notice is that Shield of the Righteous also reduces the cooldown of Crusader Strike. Again, kind of promoting damage, right? It's trying to get you to use all your abilities in conjunction, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Is Crusader Strike will help you do more healing, right? So don't be afraid to get in there, get in the melee, and use your Crusader Strike to go ahead and proc more HPS, right? Because you get your Holy Shock back faster. All right, Divine Toll. Divine Toll is our next ability here that's really useful. It casts Holy Shock on 5 targets within 30 yards. Holy Shock is a great healing ability, and casting it on 5 targets is even better. So there's some things to note here is that Holy Shock, Divine Toll has some targeting issues, sort of, kind of. It's not really a smart heal. If everyone's health is at 1% and there's a bunch of enemy targets, it will hit the enemy targets if you have nothing targeted, right? So if I have nothing targeted, it will go ahead and prioritize the enemies before it'll prioritize allies, even if those allies are near to death. It's not a smart heal. So it prioritizes enemies, then allies. So if there's no more enemies to hit, it'll hit an ally left over, but it will not prioritize an ally. So what do we need to do in order to get it to prioritize an ally? Because having 5 targets hit with Divine Toll, especially if you combine it with Beacon of Virtue, which we go over more later, that's really useful, right? That's really good HPS that you don't want to lose, right? That's a lot of healing. 3, 4, 9, 12, 15. It's like 1.5 million healing going out to the whole group. But if you have no ally targeted, it might, half of that or more of it or all of it could be wasted as damage. So what I recommend is having a macro, right? I have a macro here that I can also have in the description for you. And the macro is just show tooltip, cast at player, Divine Toll, and that makes sure that it always casts at myself. So I'm always one of the 5 targets. And that will change Divine Toll's priority so that it will then target allies instead, and then enemies if there's no allies within range after that, right? So I think that's really important. You can have 2 versions of Divine Toll, one for damage where it'll just target nothing, which will make it automatically hit DPS, right? It'll do damage. And then if you need the healing, then you have your macro. That's how I run it. That's how I suggest it. I wouldn't want to waste that HPS. Okay, so Beacon of Light synergy is Beacon of Virtue is really important to synergize with that, right? Because if you cast Divine Toll on its own, it does 1.3, but if you 1.5 million, right, on average ish, can crit for more. It can do a little less. But if you have Beacon of Virtue going, that means all allies in your group, which again I have a macro for Beacon of Virtue. Making sure that it always casts it at myself, because if there's no one in range and you're not targeting anyone when you cast Beacon of Virtue, it won't cast. It needs a target. So I always have it on myself to make sure that I can cast it without having to stress. So you cast Beacon of Virtue, then Divine Toll. Then Divine Toll will now radiate to everybody, right? So every person will give 15% of their beacon, right, healing, to each other, right? And then 15% of that, and then 15% of that, and then 15% of that until it reaches 0. And it does it really quickly all at once, right? So if you have Beacon of Virtue out and then you cast Divine Toll, you'll hit everyone for 1.5 million healing, and then that 1.5 million is then you know, given 15% of that to each person. So each person will receive 15% of everyone else's healing, and then everyone will receive 15% of that. So it's really, really powerful when you combine it with Beacon of Virtue. The amount of healing it does just goes up by a significant margin. It goes from a kind of so-so healing cooldown to a really, really good healing cooldown when you combine it with Beacon of Virtue. So keep that in mind. Another synergy we have going on is Rising Sunlight, which we talked about earlier. So when you cast Divine Toll, right, you're not just healing yourself. You're not just doing a lot of healing, but you're also getting your nice stacks, right? You're getting those lovely stacks of Rising Sunlight, which increase, you know, your multiple casts of Holy Shock. And it also gives you more holy power. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're casting Divine Toll, each Holy Shock counts as you actually casting Holy Shock, so you get 1 holy power for each. So you'll always get 5 holy power when you cast Divine Toll. Granted, you have that many targets, right? So if it's just you and one other target, you'll get 2. You'll get 2, right? If you have 3, you'll get 3, and so on and so forth. But most of the time, when you're in a dungeon, you're in a key, Mythic Plus, which is what this build is focusing on, you will get 5 holy power. So it can be smart if you're going into a pull. You're about to cast Divine Toll, to make sure that you kind of just spend that holy power first before you cast Divine Toll, because Divine Toll automatically, you know, sets you to full, and then you want to cast Eternal Flame or Shield of the Righteous before you cast Holy Shock, because those next Holy Shocks will trigger 3 holy power, right? It's a little bit of efficiency there that you can keep track of. You don't want to waste that that holy power. Sometimes you're just drowning in holy power, and other times you're starving for it. You can't find anyone to heal, and it's devastating. So it's smart to just keep track of that, right? Okay, Avenging Wrath and or slash Avenging Crusader. So Avenging Crusader is the other talent with Avenging Wrath. When you cast Avenging Wrath, it procs our Sun's Avatar buff, which increases your Dawnlight's effectiveness, right? And by increasing its duration, and it also casts 4 Dawnlights, right? If you use Avenging Crusader, it casts 2 Dawnlights, and that's to reflect its reduced cast time, cooldown time, right? So Avenging Wrath, 2 minute cooldown, and Avenging Crusader's 1 minute cooldown. So if you were to cast Avenging Wrath or Avenging Crusader every minute, every time the cooldown was off, so either every 2 minutes or every minute, at the end of a key, you would have gotten the same amount of Dawnlights out of it, right? So you are getting a little bit of a buff by being able to cast Avenging Crusader more frequently than Avenging Wrath, but you don't get as many Dawnlights, but you do, because every 2 minutes. But Avenging Crusader is really powerful because it's healing and critical. Your healing is increased by 15%, your damage is increased by 15%, and your critical strike, right? And that's not 15% of your current value, it's just an additional 15%. So watch my 17% crit turn into 32% crit, right? So that's a lot of critical strike, and it'll increase the amount of healing you do by quite a lot, because 15% plus such a high amount of crit, right? And you'll probably have, you know, a little bit higher crit overall in the end of season. This much mastery is kind of obscene. It's too much. If I had true stat values installed through the add-on thing, you would probably see that you're not getting a lot of value out of having such high mastery. So, which I think if you just highlight it, it'll show you, right? It'll already showing you that mastery is giving you 45% healing, not 63% base healing, right? So, Avenging Wrath, it also gives you Rising Sunlight, right? So you get Rising Sunlight, which is that buff, right, that I talked about earlier, that allows you to cast Holy Shock 2 additional times. So when you pop into your Avenging Wrath, you also get 2 stacks of Rising Sunlight, right? So it's really powerful. So if you're in a big damage event, you know, you pop Beacon of Virtue, then Avenging Wrath, and then you can send, you know, if you have Holy Power already, you can send an Eternal Flame, and then do some Holy Shocks, and you'll really just send up everyone's health bars really fast, because Dawnlights are really powerful, and we'll go over that in a bit. I think I missed this. I'm going to go over it. The tier set this season, for Season 2, Divine Toll applies Insurance, which is like a healing ability. It does about as much healing as a Dawnlight, which is pretty crazy. and has an ability when they drop below 40% health, it heals them for an additional amount. And then it says when you cast Divine Toll, everyone hit by your Holy Shocks get insurance, right? And it also says that Divine Toll's cooldown is reduced by 1 second for Holy Power spent, right? That's each Holy Power spent. That's not each Holy Power ability used, right? It's not 3 Holy Power. So each time you cast a Holy Power spender, you reduced Divine Toll's cooldown by 6 seconds, right? So if we look at 3 seconds, sorry. So if we go over here and we cast Divine Toll, okay, it's 44 seconds, and then I cast, boom, and the cooldown goes down. And you can see that cooldown dropping. It looks like it's actually just dropping by 1 second. Okay, it does drops by a second. Never mind. It says, maybe it's not working right because we're on the PTR, right? But what it says is Divine Toll's cooldown is reduced by 1 second for each time you spend Holy Power. Okay, sorry, I misread that. Yeah, so it is one, so it's, oh well. Okay, sorry for the confusion. All right, Avenging Wrath. Okay, so Beacon. So let's go over Beacon. And let's talk about Beacon. So right now we're running Beacon of Virtue. You can also run Beacon of Faith and Beacon of Light, right? So if you switch over, your Beacon of Virtue is split into 2 abilities rather than 1. So you get your Beacon of Faith and your Beacon of Light. Light, there it is. And these are permanent, right? So you cast it on a person, and then it stays there until they die, or until a certain distance, I think it might fall off, or until you cast it on a new target. Oh, you'll move that beacon, right? Beacon of Virtue, however, doesn't work that way. Beacon of Virtue casts, it costs a bunch of mana, lasts for 7 seconds or 8 seconds, right? Just drops away immediately. 8 seconds, and it shares less healing between the targets than Beacon of Light and Beacon of Faith, but it's more because it's more targets, right? So it ends up being about the same. Overall, you'll see that you'll get more HPS at the end of a key through your beacon if you have Beacon of Virtue and you use it properly than if you don't. But let's go over some of the synergies of Beacon of Light and understand why Beacon of Virtue is so powerful. Okay, so Beacon of Virtue, we have a talent called Beacon of the Lightbringer. Okay, Beacon of the Lightbringer, where's that at? Beacon of the Lightbringer. So Beacon of the Lightbringer says that your mastery, right, our mastery that says our healing is increased based on our distance, right? So it says healing is increased by 63% based on the proximity to your target, right? So that now happens to anyone who has your Beacon of active on them. So if you have the permanent Beacon of Light and Beacon of Faith, those targets count as you, and they get 100% of your mastery, right? But they also count as you for healing other allies. So if there is an ally in between, so let's say I'm here, right, and then my Beacon target is there, and I have someone here, they might be getting as much as 50% of my mastery instead of what should be kind of like 30% of my mastery or 20% of my mastery because of the distance, right? So I can be in melee range, right? And I can have a beacon target over there. And now both of these people, right? Both of these guys will be getting maximum mastery healing from me rather than, at this distance would be like 10% of my mastery. So that just increases the amount of healing you do constantly by a lot, and that's why Beacon of Virtue is really powerful, because everyone gets the maximum amount of effectiveness from our mastery during Beacon of Virtue's time. So you just do so much more healing when you have Beacon of Virtue, because you have 100% effective mastery while you're healing. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is Light's protections, right? If we look at Light's protection, it says allies with Beacon of Light receive 5% less damage. So when we cast Beacon of Virtue, everyone gets a 5% DR, right? So that's really, really valuable, and it's part of the reason why, what I said earlier, you want to cast Beacon of Virtue before the damage event, right? Because if you cast it after the damage event and it's a bursty damage event, like one big pop of damage, that's damage that can no longer be negated because the damage is gone. So if you cast it right before the damage event, like a second before the damage event, then you've reduced the amount of healing you need to do to everyone by 5%, potentially saving someone's life. Someone might have died, right? Let's say it does 10 million damage, and they only have, 9.8 million health, and then you reduce that damage by 5%. Congratulations, they're like just barely alive, right? So it can make the difference. It's not always going to make the difference, and it'll in general feel almost, unnoticeable, but it does matter and it does add up, right? Every time that's 25% damage reduction on the whole group, right? From if the damage was like, imagine all the people in the group were one person, and the damage event was just one huge amount of damage, right? So let's say it's 30 million health for the group. Four people is like 40 million. Tank is like 15 million, so 55. Let's say it's like 55 million health. You just did 25% damage reduction to that massive health pool. And so if you think of it that way, super strong, very valuable. Okay, so that's one of the really good synergies of having the Beacon of Virtue on everyone, is because you can throw it out on everyone. Argument can be made for Beacon of Light and Beacon of Faith, because that's permanent 5% damage reduction all the time. But yeah. The other talent is Saved by the Light. Saved by the Light puts an absorb shield on the target with Beacon active when their health drops below 50%. So again, if a big damage event goes out and you don't have Beacon already out, right, that means that they won't benefit from that absorb shield after you cast it, right? Yes, the absorb shield will pop if their health is still below 30%, 50% when you cast it, but it's not going to be contributed towards the reducing the amount of damage they take, right? So if you cast Beacon of Light and then people take more than their 50% health, it'll pop, right? And that'll protect them from death. And I've seen it happen a lot, where it's reduced the amount of damage and it's saved people's lives. Okay. It's a large absorb shield. It's a 1 minute cooldown. That's something to remember. It can't happen again within that period of time. So you want to precast it before for the mitigation, and because if you're in a high damage event, which we'll talk about more later, you don't always necessarily have time to be casting, because when you cast Beacon of Virtue, that's a global cooldown, right? And sometimes being a little bit behind on the global cooldowns of your spells can be the difference between life and death. So yeah. Precast it. Precast, not a huge amount of time because it only lasts for 8 seconds, right? You can't precast it like 15 seconds prior, because then you miss the damage event. But like right before that damage event. So if you see like the boss that has a cast bar, the cast bar is right about to end, you cast it right then, and then you can dump right into your healing. You've done your damage reduction. You've got out your heal absorb. Your absorb shield, right? So just really good synergies there. And then that, the beacons I mentioned earlier have a ping pong effect, right? They have like a waterfall effect. So 15% of the healing that goes out is then shared to everyone in the group, and then 15% of that, and then 15% of that, and then 15% of that, forever until it hits 0. And it does that instantly. You do a heal and boom, a million is turned into 1.5 million immediately, right? And across the whole group. So you'll see that Divine Toll, heals pretty decently. So we'll cast Divine Toll. Boom. How much healing did I don't know why it says like I'm still in. Anyway, it's hard to show right now because everything's people here, and it's just I'm just like stuck in combat. Sorry, I apologize, but I promise you it does much more. I didn't record it, but I did a key on the public test realm, which is where we are now. I did a key, and I saw the difference between casting Divine Toll with and without, especially now that Holy Shock has been buffed. The amount of healing that Holy Shock does has been buffed quite a lot. Combining that with Beacon of Virtue is even stronger. Even though Beacon has been reduced a little bit in its effectiveness, the overall buff is still really good, still really worth it. Okay, so Holy Light has changed. Holy Light was not as powerful in Dragonflight. In Dragonflight, in a key, I would probably cast Holy Light maybe 10 times, maybe less, depending on certain synergies with some of these abilities, right? Divine Favor and Hand of Divinity. I might cast Holy Light a little more frequently But it's pretty rare because it costs a lot of mana. It used to. It still does cost quite a bit of mana, but it costs a lot of mana, and it didn't do very much healing. It was 165,000 mana, and it did like 230,000 healing. So like it was like less, or it was like the same as Holy Shock, but Holy Shock is instant cast and costs 70,000, and then Holy Light has, you know, it's just like what? That's crazy. So they buffed the healing of Holy Light by quite a bit. So let's talk about Holy Light, how to use it, and some of its synergies. Okay, so Holy Light, one of its synergies is Resplendent Light. So look at Holy Light and look at all the things that are buffed and affected. So Resplendent Light. Okay, so Resplendent Light. So when you cast Holy Light, 5 targets within 12 yards are healed for 8% of its healing, right? So kind of it's got some splash effect. 8%, pretty low. Maybe a little bit more, you know, splash if Beacon of Virtue is active. I'm not saying to activate Beacon of Virtue just to cast Holy Light, but if Beacon of Virtue is already active, you know, then that waterfall effect is increased. That's nice. Also, Selfless Healer. So Selfless Healer says when Holy Light is cast on an ally other than yourself, its healing is increased by 10%, and then 10% of that healing also heals you. So, you know, that these talents both already existed, but now that Holy Light is actually worth casting because its healing has been increased by so much, these talents are actually talents that are really worth grabbing now and have a lot of effectiveness. We also have got Tower of Radiance, which says casting Holy Light or Flash of Light generates 1 holy power. Okay, a lot of these abilities will say Holy Light or Flash of Light, right? Like this one says Holy Light or Flash of Light. So Flash of Light, you know, will see a little bit more play. Probably still not a ton. I might cast it, you know, 100 times this season instead of once. You know, it's just Holy Shock is just so powerful and off cooldown so frequently. Divine Toll, you know, so powerful off cooldown so frequently. A lot of these abilities are just available so often that I just can't see me casting Flash of Light a ton. But I do think it has a place now that it has such a small mana cost. You know, you might use it when you literally have no mana, you get nothing else to cast. It might see play then. But that's like worst case scenario. And it does hit for like almost as much as a Holy Shock. Like not quite, but with some of the modifiers here, you know, maybe, sort of, kind of, right? So we'll see. But we're focusing on Holy Light here. So that's one of the things. The other thing here is Inflorescence of the Sunwell, which increases how many stacks of Infusion of Light you have. Infusion of Light, I should have gone over Infusion of Light with Holy Shock. Infusion of Light is something that you have a chance to proc whenever you crit with, there it is, Holy Shock. So when you crit with Holy Shock, you get Infusion of Light. Sorry, that's not why it's glowing. It's glowing Rising Sunlight. Infusion of Light doesn't last terribly long. I think it's like 15 seconds, and it increases the healing of your next Holy Light or Judgment. Right, increases Greater Judgment. Let's see. Let's go ahead and cast this again. Flash of Light increased by 45%. Holy Light increased by 45%. And Judgment, Greater Judgment increased by 100%. Go over Greater Judgment later. But yeah, so Infusion of Light is really good and increases the effectiveness of Holy Light by, you know, 45%. So it'll a really serious heal. Definitely worth it, right? Infusion of Light would definitely make Flash of Light worth casting. You know, still not super worth casting. Remember, 700,000 right now is not a ton because our health pools have been effectively doubled, right? Not exactly, they're like 40% more. So 700,000 is 40% less impressive this season than it was last season. That's just something to keep. Holy Light, Holy Light, Holy Light. Oh yeah, you also reduce the mana cost of when you cast Holy Light with Divine Favor. So Divine Favor is something that you get every time you cast Holy Prism. Cast Holy Prism, you get Divine Favor. So cast Holy Prism. Wow. And then you can see I got Divine Favor. Divine Favor never falls off. It lasts forever. Oh. I just got good from PR. Okay. Relaunch the PT. Unforge. Sorry. Bear with me. Give me a moment. We're reloading. We got that PTR crash. Here we're coming. Here we come. Tutorial inbound. We're going to be talking about divine favor. The favor of the divine. Almost there. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. 3 Mississippi. 4. Okay, there we go. All right. Divine favor. See, it lasts even after being disconnected. It lasts forever. Your holy light heals for 20% more. And the cast time is reduced by 30%, and the mana cost is 50%, right? Really good, really great. So cast Holy Light. Whoop, boom. It hits harder, costs less, and casts a little bit faster. So Divine Favor is great. Great synergy with Holy Prism. Sorry, you cast Holy Prism, and you get that faster Holy Light, healing at a higher effectiveness and half the mana cost. What more can you ask for? You could ask for 100% off and 100% free speed, which, you know, is kind of hand of divinity. It's 1.5 minute cooldown, so you can't use it as often, right? Because you can cast Holy Prism every 30 seconds. So you can get 3 divine favors in the time that you get 1 hand of divinity, but hand of divinity is instant, right? So, sorry, background. Pretty still pretty low. Okay, so divine favor. You could have a weak aura for tracking divine favor. If you have a personal resource display, divine favor will pop up on there. There it is. You can see divine purpose, you can see blessing on she, you can see dawn lights and divine favor. They all show up there. And we will talk about the personal resource display more later. Man, that guy is loud. I'm just gonna mute that guy's goodness gracious. Those shaman lightning bolts is loud. Okay. Holy light. Where were we? Oop. Okay, so what are the use cases for holy light? So let's say you're in a low damage event, right? What is a low damage? A low damage event looks like this. And put up. A low damage event looks like this. Oh, that's a high damage. Low damage event looks like this. Okay, so you see there's damage going out quite consistently, right? You see health bars are moving up and down, but they're not moving up and down at an incredible rate. They're pretty solid, right? Everyone's at 100%. Then someone goes down a little bit, right? Just a bit here and there. So this is a perfect time for using Holy Light, right? I would cast, you know, Beacon of Virtue and then do some Holy Lights because there's no big damage event. This is just really soft damage, very passive. You know, that would be a decent use case if, let's say, you're out of, you know, Holy Power. You've got no cooldowns, right? Like Holy Shock's on cooldown, Divine Toll's on cooldown, right? Then Holy Light is a totally valid, you know, use case here. You could cast Holy Light to push up those health bars because a low damage event is like you have no pressure to get those health bars up, right? The amount of time you have like 15, 30 seconds to push a health bar up before, you know, the next damage goes out. So you're really under no risk of time. You don't need to rush and push out healing. You know, you could even potentially use Flash of Light in the scenarios because there's just really not a lot going on, and you don't need to like rush and burn, you know, powerful cooldowns, and you can use Holy Light. In the past, you know, in this video, this is from season 1 of War Within. So you don't see me using Holy Light almost at all because it's really slow, costs a lot of mana, and doesn't do very much healing. So why would I use it? Right. So I'm not using it here, but this would be a use case in season 2 in a kind of low damage environment. Holy Light can be useful if you're out of cooldowns and you want to do healing. It's totally valid. It also generates holy power. So awesome. Okay. Let's take a look at the ability. I'm just pulling my script. Okay. All right, so let's talk about Herald of the Sun and Dawn Lights. Okay, so Herald of the Sun, when you use Herald of the Sun, you get Dawn Lights. What is a Dawn Light? After casting Holy Prism, Barrier of Faith, we're running Holy Prism, but after casting either one of those abilities, you get a Dawn Light. You get your next two Holy Power spenders apply Dawn Lights, and Dawn Lights heal and deal. So sometimes a Dawn Light will apply to an enemy, sometimes they apply to an ally. I think Dawn Lights do use smart healing, and I know that in season 2 they're getting so that the Dawn Lights won't go to pets anymore. Apparently they used to do that quite a lot in season 1. I hadn't really noticed a ton, as I switched to Lightsmith pretty quick into season 1 of War Within. But apparently, sometimes okay, pets it doesn't do that anymore, and I'm pretty sure it follows your average smart healing kind of a thing. So if someone's really hurt, it's not going to go for damage right away. It's going to go for healing, and then 8% of that Dawn Light's healing and damage is radiated to nearby allies or enemies, right? Beyond reduced beyond 5 targets, right? So 100 targets or in a raid, right? It does less healing or less damage, but still 8% is fine, right? That's like half of Beacon of Virtue, right? And if you combine Beacon of Virtue with that, hey, you're getting even more radiating holy, right? Then the other thing is, you get 4 Dawn Lights will automatically go out every time cast Avenging Wrath. You get 4 Dawn Lights, so you'll apply 4 Dawn Lights to everyone in your group. Yeah, it's 4. It's like to 4 allies, either yourself or 4 of the people. And how much healing does a Dawn Light do? Well, a Dawn Light says right here 7, 8, 8. Over 8 seconds. And that's really similar to insurance, right? You'll see insurance is pretty similar, but over a longer period of time. So it is less healing. It's over 15 seconds. So insurance is pretty powerful, actually. But yeah, so that's what a Dawn Light is. So another thing that Dawn Light does is what's called Sun's Avatar, which is when you go into Avenging Wrath, right? You get Sun's Avatar, and that will connect you to your Dawn Lights. And that means anything in between you and your Dawn Light will get some extra healing or extra damage cast on it. And then also those Dawn Lights will last 20% longer. Right? So we'll cast Holy Prism, right? And then we'll cast a Holy Battle. I've got a Dawn Light going. Now I'm going to cast Wrath. Okay, and I'm going to run around. Woo! And then all of these targets, enemies and allies, are being, tripped by my beam. Also, you can just stand there. You don't have to run. You can also just, and it will continuously heal or deal with that person in between. So you don't have to run around. You could just find like a really dense area of players or enemies and do it. You can also just walk back and forth, right? You toggle back and forth, right? And then that healing will jiggle between nice healing, right? So that's really powerful, actually. It might not sound like a ton of healing, but I'll show you what it looks like. This is what that Dawn Light effect looks like in a really high damage environment. It looks like this, right? So this is one of the biggest damaging events in War Within Season 1. City of Threads, it's the second to last boss. And that damage event you were looking at is called Dark Pulse. Everyone takes a ton of damage. If you don't heal it, people will 100% die. It's not survivable. You gotta do the healing. And most of the healing that's going out in that moment is actually just the Dawn Lights doing their thing, right? So you see, I cast Beacon of Virtue. Beacon of Virtue is active, and then I cast Avenging Wrath, and it applies all those Dawn Lights. Everyone in the group is getting healed, right? And then I also get those Holy Shock, things, and I send those Holy Shocks and Eternal Flames, right? The replacement for Glory. And you can just see how much work those Dawn Lights do. It really pretty much keeps everyone alive. It was really powerful. It's really powerful. I was disappointed to see Lightsmith, overtake Herald of the Sun in HPS in 1, because I really liked how invincible I felt like my party became. Had those Dawn Lights out, they just do a lot of healing, combined with your abilities and buffs and party effects and trinkets and all that stuff. Your Dawn Lights are really quite effective, and they do a ton of healing. Right, so the Dawn Lights are not to be slept on. They're very, very effective. They do a lot of healing. They're really, really useful. And, you can try to eke out a little more value. Like you saw me do on the target dummy. I cast you know, cast Holy Prism before, and I was just trying to get a few more Dawn Lights out. It's not super obvious because Dawn Lights don't want to connect to these target dummies all that much, because the target, it's, the update is kind of thinking of these targets being like pets, right? So it's not prioritizing healing. But if I had a bunch of allies around, if I went downstairs, around people, you'd see the Dawn shootout. But yeah, you can have as many as 6 Dawn Lights going at once if you combine Holy Prism, and then you cast 2 Holy Power Spenders Wrath, because it connects you to all your Dawn Lights, right? Not just the 4 that are cast Avenging Wrath. So that's what a Dawn Light is. It heals a lot. You can either run around or kind of find a clustery spot and just kind of, let those laser beams just dig through your party members and do lots of healing. Let's talk about Judgment and Greater Judgment. So Judgment is an ability that does damage and it generates holy power, and it also casts Unworthy on the person, right? It says the next X amount of damage will be prevented. So when that target does attack, it prevents that much damage. And that counts as healing, sort of, like an Avenger healing. And what Greater Judgment is it increases the amount of damage prevented. And then with Infusion of Light, let's get an Infusion of Light going with crit here. Crit. Okay. Yeah. There it is, Infusion of Light. It says Greater Judgment prevents 150% more damage. So that we cast, last time it was like 17,000. Look at that, 43,000. Right? So if you have nothing to use up your Infusion of Light, Judgment is a super valid target. Because it reduces the amount of damage everyone takes, and you'll see that stacks, right? So you can send them both into the target. You don't have to wait for the Unworthy to fall off, and you can reduce the amount of damage that the boss is going to do, right, by 100,000 or whatever. So if you crit, it'll increase that by 150%, right? So you can have millions of damage reduction on the party, and it gets consumed as the target does damage. So Judgment is a valuable part of your healing rotation as well as damage, right? Crusader Strike reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock, and Judgment does, also Crusader Strike reduces Judgment, right? It also reduces both of them. And Shield of the Righteous reduces the cooldown of Crusader Strike. So you have a nice little combo thing where everything's kind of feeding into each other. And so doing damage, right, being up in the business, right, and contributing damage is not just so you can do damage. It also does healing, right? It's like everything you've got going on is feeding into your healing as a holy paladin. So we really are melee healers, right? And by getting all up in the business of the enemies and doing your damage rotation, you are effectively also doing healing, right? So it is valuable to be working on your damage rotation and doing damage when there's you're in a low damage environment and you have time to focus on damage. Doing damage is doing healing, so do it. Right, you're resetting cooldowns, and you're preventing damage. So super worth it. Do it. Right. So the Judgment, Greater Judgment, reduces the damage taken, and it's just great. It also generates holy power. So it's just like, why not be casting these to have holy power for your Eternal Flame, your Shield of the Righteous? It's just, everything's just good, right? And with this talent here, Shining Righteousness increases the damage your Shield of Righteousness does on its first target, almost more than, like it, doubling, right, its damage, right? Because it's a little bit of damage. So it increases its damage by a lot on one target. It's not hits. Shield of Righteousness. But after 5 Shield of Righteousnesses, you get a free Dawn Light, Light of Dawn, or Eternal Flame, which is what you'll see here. I'll cast a bunch. I'll get Shield of Righteousness out. Boo, 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 boo. You can see I'm getting stacks of Shining Righteousness there. 3 stacks, almost there. 4 stacks, boom, and then you'll see they're glowing. Why are they glowing? They're glowing because the next one I cast is free. Okay. So damage equals healing in that way, in a about kind of way. All right, let's talk about the tier set. I already kind of went over it, but let's go over it again. The 2 set gives you insurance. It says your spells, your healing spells, have a chance to apply insurance to their targets that heals them for a blank amount. That amount changes based on something. I'm not 100% sure what it changes on based on, but I've seen it show as much as like 750,000 over 17 seconds, and then it procs for more. Oh, did it get nerfed when we got disconnected? It got nerfed. Is that what happened? They were like, "Oh man, insurance is too good." Is that what's going on here? Let me try to reset my combat by flying and flying out of combat because I can fly away, but that okay. Let's take a look at our tier set. Okay, yeah, no, they nerfed it. they, they they nerfed it live. Yeah, so it was 700 and something thousand, 770,000, something like that. It's now 300 and something thousand. It's been nerfed significantly, like more than half, right? Wow, that's crazy. Okay, well, insurance is a thing that happens, but it also says that divine toll, so that's your 2 set. When they drop below 40%, you can read it; it's right there. But that's the thing. I'm kind of in shock that it got nerfed while we were talking about it. It's crazy. Uh, wow. Okay. Um, and then divine toll applies insurance, which is that healing buff from earlier, and then that kind of think of it like an absorb shield or like a cheat death sort of thing. Not exactly, but when they drop below 40% health, give them extra healing. And then it says when you cast divine toll, everyone gets insurance, and your holy power, each time you spend holy power, reduce the cost of the cooldown. Sorry, can't speak English, of divine toll by 1 second. Okay, so yeah, that's the set bonus. Was better than it is now, but still fine. It'll be kind of, oh, it's back. It's buffed again. I don't know. There's got to be some modifier that I don't understand, but it's back to 752,000. Okay, it's not nerfed. I don't understand what's causing that modifier. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they unnerfed it live. I have no idea. I don't know what's going on. I'm lost. Okay, let's move on to something I'm not lost about. So let's talk about Blessing of Summer. It has 4 different incarnations: Blessing of Summer, Blessing of Autumn, Blessing of Winter, and Blessing of Spring. Blessing of Summer converts 12% of your damage into healing and 12% of your healing into damage. You can also cast this on allies, and if you cast it on an ally, it converts 12% of their damage or healing into healing or damage. So if you have someone who has incredibly high burst, right? Like let's say you're doing a really big pull and you have a Moonkin that is just going to do insane AoE damage, you can throw Blessing of Summer on them, which will give them 12% of their damage, right? So if they're doing 10 million damage, right, then 12% of that is going to radiate out of them as healing. So you can be worthy to cast on one of them, but also if you know that a big damage event is coming, you can cast it on yourself, and then you will do a ton of healing, and 12% of that massive amounts of healing will be converted as damage. So I personally pretty much always just cast Blessing of Summer on myself. It is not meta, right? The best thing to do would always be finding that target that's providing the most value based on the situation, right? So if it's a low damage environment, then you'd want to put that on a DPS. And if it's a high damage environment, you'd want to put it on yourself. But personally, I just always cast it on myself. Blessing of Autumn says that your cooldown recovery is increased by 30%. Again, I always cast that on myself because getting Avenging Wrath back up faster, Divine Toll back up faster, the Blessing itself back up faster, Divine Shield faster, Lay on Hands faster. Like, I have a lot of cooldowns that I'd really like to use. Aura Mastery, right? These are cooldowns that I want back as soon as possible. Why not on me, right? Well, you can cast it on your tank. Maybe your tank, it just used a ton of defensives, and it would be more economic to cast it on your tank to make sure that they can get some of that healing back, right? Some of their defensiveness back. So totally a valid argument to cast it on your tank, right? so that they can get some of their defenses back. Or cast it on a DPS, right? You know, you have a DPS that's really bursty and has a lot of damage output when they have, you know, really, they have their cooldowns. So totally valid to cast it on a DPS. But personally, I always cast it on myself because my job as a healer is to keep everyone alive. And I want to make sure I do a good job at that. So I cast it on myself. Blessing Winter. Restore 1% of your mana every 2 seconds for 30 seconds. Really good in raid, right? Raids are often endurance events, especially early in the season when your gear is not so good, right? You use a lot more mana because you got to cast more spells to do the same amount of healing. So you're going to need Blessing of Winter. If you don't, though, because you have an efficient build or you're just playing really carefully, you can cast it on other healers. I don't know if you can cast it on Arcane Mage. I've never tried, but I think you can. I know that you can only cast it on people with a mana bar. And I've pretty much only ever been able to use it on a healer. Not 100% sure if it can only be used on healers, but you cast on yourself. And one of the things with Blessing of Winter is you might think, oh well, I have full mana right now. My blessing is up and available to cast. Maybe I should wait, right? This is the blessing we're talking about. The icon changes every time you cast it, right? Changes to a new icon, changes to the next thing. Sorry if you didn't understand that. Blessing of Summer, Autumn, they're not different spells. It's the same spell, and it changes its spell ID every time you cast it. Has a 45-second cooldown, and then you get a new ability and rotate. So Blessing of Winter, you're like, oh well, I have full mana, I don't need it right now. Then just cast it because you don't need it, and sitting on it means that you're not getting to those more valuable. Not casting it means that you're not getting to those powerful abilities like Blessing of Summer, Blessing of and Blessing of Spring, which we'll go into in a second. So just cast it, and then you'll generate some mana. Maybe it's, you know, you're capping on mana, so it's not super worth it. But then it means you weren't going to need it anytime soon anyway, because you're full of mana, and you can just move on to the next buff. But usually, you know, it will provide you some value. So just cast it anyway. Always cast it. Always be cast in Blessing. It's the right time to use Blessing is now. Now, Blessing of Spring is the only one that I will hold off on casting potentially, right? Right. So like earlier when we talked about high damage events, and I showed you that clip of, you know, what's this place called? City of Threads, right? And the Dark Pulse. That is a time that having Blessing of Spring, Blessing of Spring might be really valuable because Blessing of Spring is really powerful. So let's talk about Blessing of Spring. Do it a little bit more than so. Let's get into Blessing of Spring. Okay, Blessing of Spring increases your healing done by 15% and the healing received by 30%, right? So there's a few case scenarios where how you could use this. It could be argued that you cast it, it's good for tanks, right? So if you know your tank is about to start taking really heavy damage, but no one else in the party is really going to be taking any damage, then you can cast Blessing of Spring on your tank, and then they're going to be receiving 30% more healing from their own spells and abilities, as well as your spells and abilities. So you're going to be able to heal them much more effectively. And the healing they do is increased by 15%, right? So if you've got a Death Knight, or you've got a Guardian Druid, or you've got a Prop Paladin, and they're casting, you know, Frenzied Regeneration, that's 15% harder. And then also they're receiving 30% more of that 15. So that's 45% more healing from their healing abilities, right? Death Knight, their Death Strike, or whatever it's called, is going to be healing for way more. You cast it on a Prop Paladin, and their Word of Glory is going to be healing for way more, right? 45% harder on themselves. And you know, if you have a monk or a holy Prop Paladin, you know, a Brewmaster can cast Vivify on other people if they want. That means they're really doing more healing to the group as to themselves and to others. So super valuable. However, if it's a high damage event, right, like I said earlier, like with you know, the Dark Pulse high damage event, then being able to increase your healing by 15% to your whole party is much more worth it than putting it on one person. As well as if you focus healing on yourself, then you're boosting the amount of spill healing you're doing with your beacon virtue, right? Because 15% of the healing that's going out to any one person is being shared to everybody. So if you increase the amount of healing to yourself by 45%, along with uh, things like selfless healer. You cast someone else, and then 10% of that is hitting you, and that's increased by 45%, and then 15% is being shared to your whole group. There's a talent, inspired guard, which divine protection increases the healing taken by 15%, right? So you stack that with blessing of spring, and then you heal yourself. Now you're healing yourself, for 60% more healing, right? Of the healing you're doing is hitting everyone in your group. So, super valuable, super valuable. That's just, yeah, good. That's good math, right? So Blessing of Spring, I usually cast it on myself, right? So basically, always cast your blessings as soon as they're available. Cast them and cast them on yourself. In very rare, once you're better at the class, once you're more familiar and comfortable, you can cast it on other people, right? But for the most part, you're always going to be casting it yourself. And you want to get as many casts of Blessing of Summer, Blessing of Winter, Blessing of Spring, Blessing of Autumn as possible in a key, which means just casting it on cooldown, right? Cast it as much. Okay, Blessing of Sacrifice. Blessing of Sacrifice is a really good ability to use, as well as Aura Mastery during really high damage events. Blessing of Sacrifice is something that's useful to use on, a party member. I wouldn't use Blessing of Sacrifice during a high damage event like that Dark Pulse, right, for example. But I would use it on maybe my tank in a really big pull, right? So if we look at that necrotic wake pull, right, you can see that that tank is taking a lot of damage, and I cast Blessing of Sacrifice on it, right, and that's reducing the amount of damage he's taking by 30%, right? So that's like a whole that's like a defensive. A lot of tanks don't even have, well, a lot of tanks have 3 or 4 defensives, and maybe one of them is like 50%, then one's 25%, one's whatever. So 30% damage reduction is really serious. That's really good damage reduction. And you can see as soon as we go into that pull, right, the clip is about to replay, I cast Blessing Sacrifice on him because his health is dropping below 100%, and I know he's going to be taking a ton of damage. And if you look at my health bar barely moves, even though I'm taking so much, I'm reducing so much damage for him, potentially, right? And that's because he's a warrior, so he's got a big absorb shield with ignore pain, and so he's not really taking damage to his health bar, but I am reducing the damage that's going into his ignore pain. So it's just, profit. It's free, it stonks right there. That's just good healing sense, right? So Blessing of Sacrifice is super useful and an ability that I often have in cooldown and keys. And I use it constantly as retribution and as protection. But as holy, it is super valuable to cast it. It can really save people's lives, And if you're willing to cast it during a high damage event, which you can do, it's not like a no-no, right? Because it turns off if you go below 20% health, it'll turn off. But if you combine divine protection, right, with Blessing and Sacrifice and Beacon of Virtue going on, you're reducing their damage and taking it onto yourself. So you're taking 30% of their damage is coming to you, but then you're reducing that damage by 20%. So you're kind of deleting some of the group damage that's going on by like cycling Blessing of Sacrifice and Divine Protection in that way. And because we're all kind of sharing the healing load with the way Paladin works with Beacon of Virtue, then it's like kind of all gravy. Like everybody wins. Everybody wins. Profit. All right. Aura Mastery. Aura Mastery has the long cooldown, but like everything in our toolkit as a Paladin, as a healer, the right time to use healing cooldowns is now. Because if your group is dead, then it's too late. you're saving. Sorry, the screen is shaking so much with whatever the heck is going on with that shaman. It's good lord. Yeah. So the right time to use big cooldowns like Lay on Hands and Divine Shield is when the damage is going out. Like if we come back to this Dark Pulse, this is a time I often would use Divine Shield because it's one less person I have to worry about. It's one less person I have to heal. Right later in the season, this was just a 10, but like later in the season when I healed a 13, City of Threads, 12 City of Threads, with so much damage going out that Divine Shield is like just super useful, right? Lay on Hands super useful. You can see I use Aura Mastery in this pull, right? In that thing, I hit Aura Mastery. It's the first thing I hit, and then I go into that damage event, and I'm reducing the amount of damage everyone's taking, by 12%. It's actually not exactly 12% because with Devotion Aura, you kind of always have 3%. So it's kind of like you're increasing the damage reduction from that flat 3% to like 9%, but you get the picture. So yeah, Aura Mastery, not something you need to sit on forever. It's useful to just cast during any damage event. It doesn't need to be like the biggest, most deadliest thing ever. Just send it. The right time to send your cooldowns is now. It's your group's responsibility to keep themselves alive as much as it is yours as the healer. And people should have defensives, so they should have self heals, they should have potions, they should have, if you have a group warlock, health stones. People have all kinds of resources available to them to keep them alive. It's not just your responsibility. So sending cooldowns means that less people have to send their cooldowns, and there's good group balance to use your abilities. If you go through a whole key, right? You go through a 30-minute dungeon and you don't use lay on hands once, you have wasted a massive amount of resource by you squandered it, right? Because you're like, oh well, someone's health might be lower. 30% health. If someone's at 30%, that's a great target for lay on hands. If someone's at 45% health, depending on your setup of cooldowns, it's a great target for lay on hands, right? Now is the time. Now is the time. Later is too late. We also are running Tyrion's Devotion, which says land hands cooldown is reduced by 1.5 seconds per holy power spent and restores 5% mana, right? So you'll have lay on hands available far more frequently, right? Because it's 7-minute cooldown, but then every holy power spent, it's a second and a half, right? Another thing about land hands. Land hands is a defensive with my current build, and that's because it increases the armor of the person you cast it on by 30% for 8 seconds, right? So I have cast lay on hands on my tank when I know that he's getting a tank buster soon, and it's a physical damage tank buster. I've cast lay on hands on my tank at full health because I know that I'm giving him 30% more armor. That's really nice damage reduction, and that might allow him to survive a one shot, right? If he's out of defensives, I know that sending that armor on him can make a difference. I've cast it on myself when I was at 80% health, and I know a big damage event is coming, and that damage event is physical damage, right? Like the first boss of Stonevault. I've cast lay on hands to increase my armor, to increase the amount of damage reduction, or I've cast it on someone who is more weak in the party. Now that armor is going to be more valuable on a class that uses armor. So like Death Knight uses a lot of armor, so increasing their armor by 30% is really effective. Prot Paladin, Prot Warrior, Bear Tank, depending if they're running Iron Fur a lot, right? If they have a lot of Iron Fur. Not so much Monk, not so much Demon Hunter, but it's still valuable. 30% is a lot, right? It's not quite like, the same as Blessing and Sacrifice, but it's up there. So think of Lay on Hands as not just a healing ability, but also as a damage prevention ability, and an ability you want to use as many times as you can throughout a dungeon. And because you have, these abilities reducing its cooldown, right? We have Unbreakable Spirit, which reduces the cooldown of Divine Protection and Lay on Hands by 30%. Want to use it. Also, I'm running Light's Revocation, which means that I can cast Divine Shield even if I have Forbearance, which is something that you get when you use Lay on Hands, Blessing and Protection, or Divine Shield. You get Forbearance, which means you're not allowed to use those abilities again for 30 seconds. Well, with Light's Revocation, you can cast Divine Shield anyway. So you can Lay on Hands yourself and then reduce the amount of damage you take by 30%-ish, sort of, kind of. Armor is complicated, but, increase your armor by 30%, take less damage. Then another big damage event comes out 15 seconds later, and you Divine Shield it, right? Super valuable. Keep that in mind. The right time to use your cooldowns is now. Okay, let's talk about basic rotation for a low damage environment. So a low damage environment, right? I have that clip that I've showed you now multiple times. This is a low damage environment. See, the tank is taking some damage, but there's not much damage going to the party. You see everyone's health bar is 100%. That one guy takes a little bit, then I heal him. So I'm back to my damage rotation, working on my damage, Okay, then I think everyone takes some damage here. I take a little bit of damage. Oh, everyone takes a little bit of damage. Okay, time to do some healing, Okay, back to doing damage, right? That's a low low damage event, right? There's really not going on. Everything's kind of okay. So let's look at that rotation. This is not like a perfect how-to rotation, but you're going to start with Judgment, right? Because it reduces the damage that everyone takes. It's a good opener. It does good damage. It generates holy power. Then Crusader Strike, because Crusader Strike reduces Holy Shock's cooldown. And if you had Holy Shock, in a key, I'm talking about like, not the opener of the dungeon, but just an opener in general when you're rushing up onto a pack, Crusader Strike is going to reduce the cooldown of Holy Shock, right? So that's valuable to get going. Consecration is great. There are some talents we're not running them, right? We're not running Golden Path, which heals allies for standing in consecration, but it does decent damage. It'll do like a relatively large percent of your damage at the end of a key. It's good AoE damage. If you're running the talent Consecrated Ground, then it's a little bit larger and it slows enemies. So yeah, consecration, and then you just rotate between what's available, right? So if you have Hammer of Wrath, you do that. If you have Crusader Strike, you do that. If you have Judgment, you do that. You're just trying to rotate through your abilities, right? And you'll be casting heals intermittently, right? You'll be using that holy power either for Shield of Righteousness if no one needs healing, and then if people do need healing, you'll be casting Eternal Flame or Holy Shock. And again, Holy Shock is just as much a damage ability as it is a healing ability. Don't be afraid to send that into enemies to participate in your damage, right? And every time you crit with, you can get Infusion of Light, which increases your Judgment's damage reduction, right? So critting on an enemy is just as valid, right? And so that's kind of the basic rotation there. Nothing crazy. You can send Divine Toll. Again, Divine Toll is not a precious cooldown. If you know that you've got 3 or 4 packs that you've got to pull before a boss, right? Go ahead and send that. Send it. Okay, so that's your basic damage rotation. It's just start with Judgment, Crusader Strike, Concentration. You just kind of want to get these abilities rolling. If you've got nothing to heal, then you can send a Shield of Righteousness. If you've got a free Word of Glory, which we'll go over free spenders in a second. But if you've got free spenders, then you can send it in either or, right? Because Eternal Flame casts a hot, and that hot can give you a chance at getting that 200% increase Holy Shock, right? So there's kind of no wrong answers in your damage rotation and your kind of low damage environment healing rotation, because a lot of your abilities are kind of providing passive healing in a way. And so just go for it. All right, let's talk about high damage event. Okay, what's a high damage event? This is a high damage event, right? This Dark Pulse, super high damage. High damage event means if you don't do any healing and nobody does any defensives, either one or everyone will die. That's a high damage event, right? Extreme damage events is everyone will absolutely 100% die unless everyone uses all their defensives, the healer uses all their healing, and everyone. Those are pretty rare. You only run into extreme damage events when you're doing really high content, pushing 14s, 15. That's when you start to see, extreme damage events where it's completely unsurvivable unless everyone uses everything. But in a high damage environment, what we're looking at is pre-casting Beacon of Virtue, right? So before the damage event hits, you want to make sure you're casting Beacon of Virtue, right? Which was what you'll see at the beginning of this video. You'll see I cast Beacon of Virtue and Aura Mastery and into the damage event. It's hard to get both of them at the same time. I have them hotkeyed, but I struggled in this clip to get them both off at the same time. But yeah, the roar that the first boss of Grim Batol does, right? That's a great time to cast Beacon of Virtue right before that roar goes out, right? So you catch that damage, you're reducing that damage. Remember, you're pre-casting Beacon of Virtue because it gives people a chance to get an absorb shield. At 50%, they get a big absorb shield. It's about like 10% of their health. If you're not a tank, if you're a tank, it's like 5% of your health. And then you get that 5% damage reduction. And then also you want to be casting Beacon of Virtue before the damage event because that's one less global cooldown, right? When you cast any spell, all of your spells go on cooldown for a second. So if you cast that first, then you've got time to be casting other healing spells in high damage events. And high damage events are sometimes only 8 seconds, right? So if you don't cast something, if you take a second out of that 8 seconds, sometimes that can be the difference of falling behind a damage event, not being able to catch up, and someone dying. Right. So precast Beacon of Virtue. Then you can use Divine Toll. It does great burst healing with that waterfall effect, combining with Beacon of Virtue. And that's if you don't have Avenging Wrath. If you have Avenging Wrath up, if Avenging Wrath is available, then use Avenging Wrath, right? Because it'll hit your Dawn Lights, right? Connecting your Dawn Lights. So everyone in between your Dawn Lights is going to be healed. You're also casting Dawn Lights. You'll be casting 4 Dawn Lights, right? So you're going to be hitting at least 4 of your party members, and they're all being, linked to you by potentially crossing over and through. So the amount of healing that you're going to have is a lot. You'll also be getting those rising sunlight procs, right? When you go into Avenging Wrath, your Holy Shocks get those rising sunlights buff, and your next 2 Holy Shocks will heal more, and then you'll get more Holy Power, which you can send back into your healing, right? So that's a great response, but also Divine Toll, right? Because Divine Toll does so much healing to the whole group, right? And then it gives you those Rising Sunlight procs. You get a full Holy Power bar, right? So these are all things you want to be doing. High damage events, also Divine Protection and Aura Mastery, right? And Divine Shield if needed, and Lay on Hands if needed, right? We cast everything that we have at our disposal. The right time to cast big healing cooldowns on a high damage event is now, right? Now there are very rare, not very rare, there's somewhat rare exceptions to these high damage event things that I'm talking about, and that looks like saving a few cooldowns, right? Like Dark Pulse, right? If I send everything I have, I might not have healing cooldowns for the next Dark Pulse. I think Dark Pulse is like every minute or something like that. We can just look at the foot when it comes back up, right? See the timer over here. The Dark Pulse is happening, and then the next one is in a minute and 10 seconds, right? So I can't cast Avenging Wrath for every Dark Pulse, but I can cast Divine Toll. So it's okay to use both there. So it's kind of learning, like, when are you not going to have time for the next damage event, and when are you going to have time for the next event, and kind of processing out with that. Something that I forgot to talk about is Awakening. Awakening says you get 1 stack of Awakening every time you use a Holy Power spender. It generates 1 stack, and once you reach 15 stacks of Awakening, your next Judgment deals 40% increased damage, right? Which means that you'll be reducing with greater Judgment the damage that people will be taking, right? And it will critically strike, which was super, super, super valuable back when Hammer and Anvil was like legit, right? Because it would be a big burst of healing to the whole group, because Judgment's critical strikes cause a shockwave of healing, and that healing was really powerful, but it's been nerfed by quite a lot. So, which is why we're playing Herald of the Sun, honestly. It's a big reason why we're shifting over, because Hammer and Anvil has been nerfed so much. But yeah, and then it casts Avenging Wrath. So that's 4 Dawn Lights that you'll be throwing out. It might be 2 Dawn Lights for this version. I'm not 100% sure. It should be 4 Dawn Lights because it is Avenging Wrath, right? It just says Avenging Wrath. It's not Avenging Crusader. If you're running Avenging Crusader, Awakening will cast Avenging Crusader instead. So I'm pretty sure it's 4 Dawn Lights. So yeah, you should have a lot of options available to you if you're cycling your spells, properly. And then you want to use Holy Shock as frequently as you can to prioritize, getting your Holy Spenders, right? Your Word of Glory available. So Beacon of Virtue, Avenging Wrath, and then you'll send in, your Holy Shocks, and you use an Eternal Flame. Send in your Holy Shocks using an Eternal Flame. Divine Toll if you need to, and yeah, and you just rinse and repeat. You just keep doing that until everyone's health bars are full and you've stabilized, right? And then if you've run out of all of your big things, you can cast Holy Light now, right? Holy Light actually hits pretty hard, pretty good, it's pretty useful. You can do 2 to 3 million healing. If you have Infusion of Lights, it'll be healing even harder. It's generating Holy Power, right? So if you run out of really, hard hitting healing abilities, then you can go ahead and cast that Holy Light. But you want to make sure you want to prioritize those Eternal Flames, right? Because Eternal Flame is healing for so much and puts a hot, which gives you a chance to proc divine, not divine favor, blessing of Anshi, right? So you've got plenty of options available for you for healing. And remember that, 8% of your healing is cast onto the people, 10% of your healing is cast on yourself when you cast, Holy Light. So Holy Light is totally valid in a high damage event if you've run out of all your instant cast stuff. But typically, even though Holy Light hits so hard, your instant cast stuff is going to be more impactful in a really high quick damage event environment because it's instant, right? Look how much time this takes. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, right? It takes 1.7 seconds. It's almost 2 seconds where I can cast Holy Shock twice in that same amount of time, or Holy Shock and Holy Prism, right? Which is going to be more healing overall to the whole party than one Holy Light, sort of, kind of, because Holy Light. Sorry, apologize. Because Holy Light, uh, you know, echoing onto other people and to yourself. Holy Light is really a valid cast. It wasn't before, but it super is now. Okay, so free holy power spenders. What is that? When you cast Holy Prism, you get Divine Purpose. Divine Purpose says your next holy power spender is free and is increased by 15%, right? 15% more damage or 15% more healing. You can also get Divine Favor anytime you cast a holy power spender if you have the talent Divine Purpose. Sorry, Divine Purpose. You can also get Divine Purpose anytime you cast any holy power spender if you have the talent Divine Purpose. Right, so it says anytime you spend do a holy power spender, you have a 15% chance to get Divine Purpose, which is a free. And so you'll see it pop up on my resource display as I'm casting there. There's one from the Holy Prism, and then as I keep casting my spenders here, boop 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 boo. There's an Eternal Flame. There's an Eternal Flame. Nope, I got a Divine Purpose. Okay, that's a free one. And then cast. Cast. Oh, there's another Divine Purpose, right? So that again, I track Divine Purpose not just with my personal resource display, but I track it with my whatchamacallit. I have weak auras, right? I have weak auras to track it. And it lets me know. You can see it in this video, maybe. Doesn't look like it. I think. Oh yeah, no, it procced right at the end there. Right at the end of that footage, you saw the weak aura. You also see the weak aura. It's above my holy power bar, which is not under my nameplate, but above my thing. There it is. You see the little divine purpose thing pop up. You can also see that like cast bar that's tracking my awakening, my stacks of awakening. You can see that glowing thing. That's my Anshi. You can see that CDR that's tracking thing of summer, letting me know when it's going to be available, so I don't miss potential casts. Right. You can see over here, you can see Divine Favor. You can see my stacks of Rising Sunlight. You can see Blessing of Chi popping up and down. It's not super, super, super relevant to track those things, but I like knowing that it's there so that I know I can use it. Right? It gives me that extra confidence that I know it's gonna hit a little harder, or helps me choose what I'm gonna cast. Right? If you saw you had Blessing of Chi and Rising Sunlight available, you know that you'd rather cast Holy Shock if it's off cooldown than Holy Light in a high damage event because it's going to hit really hard and hit multiple times, right? So definitely something worth tracking. Now, if you don't want to do weak auras, right? You hate weak auras, or you just don't want to install any add-ons, you like vanilla WoW, you want it as vanilla as possible, your personal resource display is definitely something that you can use. Personal resource display is automatically turned on for most people when they start a new account. But if you don't have it on, you can just go into your settings, type in personal resource display, it'll pop up. And then when you're in combat, you have your holy power down here, your health and your mana, and then active buffs, right? Divine Favor is there. You can tell me that. Boom. Get Divine Favor again. And then it shows me my Divine Purpose, and it shows me how many Dawn Lights I've got active, right? So that it knows when I cast Wrath, those Dawn Lights will be connected, right? The Blessing of Anshi, it tells me how much time I have my Avenging Wrath. So the personal resource display is in a completely valid way to run without weak auras because it kind of is a weak aura, right? It shows me my Shining Righteousness stacks, which is how many times I've cast Shield of Righteousness, and tells me once 5 stacks, right? My 5th stack, it'll give me a free Holy Power Spender. Actually, it's only free Word of Glory or Light of Dawn. It isn't a Shield of Righteousness. Yeah, I don't have enough holy power to cast. I don't have Divine Purpose, but I can cast either or. but not Shield of Righteousness. And that's from that talent. Shiny Righteousness. Yeah, that's pretty much everything, guys. I pretty much went over everything in this build. Again, I'm not running the talents you'll find on Wowhead. I think that being able to cast Divine Shield, even though if you have Forbearance, especially if you run with like a prop Paladin, it's your tank. If your prop Paladin casts Lay on Hands on you, and you were planning on using Divine Shield, you can't now, right? You might die. And vice versa, your tank, you might cast Lay on Hands on your tank when they were planning to use Divine Shield, right? And it doesn't help them, right? That they need to run lights verification if they but I think it's super valuable. I think it's really useful, and I run that. They don't recommend it this season. They're recommending Just Reward instead of Imperial Ward, and I don't think Just Reward is strong enough. I think 300,000 healing is nice. You know, I dispel something, but I can only dispel something once every 8 seconds at most, because that's the cooldown, right? So I just feel like that's really not that valuable. If I look at the end of a key, it'll probably be less than 1% of my healing. And I think being able to add 30% armor is more valuable, so I went with that. I also changed, I think, another talent point down here. I moved something. I don't know. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was Divine Reach or something. Let me just look at the talent tree. I picked up Revocation, but I remember I dropped something to get it. What did I drop? I dropped After Image. Pick up Lights Revocation. I just don't think After Image is really that valuable. After 20 Holy Power, right? So how many is that? 6 after you cast 6.6, like, you know, after like 7-ish Holy Power spenders, you get a free Word of Glory, which I think will be translated into an Eternal Flame. Echoes onto nearby allies at 30% effectiveness, so I guess it hits everybody. But you know, it's like you don't have a ton of control over that. I mean, you could be tracking your after image stacks, but why? Like, I mean, getting that to work and hit at a moment that it's not going to just be overheal, I feel like is not super relevant, and so I'd rather have that armor that I can control. However, if you don't want to do that, if you feel like there's too much work and you're never going to use the armor buff, it's totally valid to throw that into, you know, after image, because it's just passive healing that you're just going to get for free. And if you're not using Lay on Hands enough, or you're not thinking of it so three-dimensionally, then, you know, you might get more value out of after image. Where I personally just don't see it as being all that worth it. I also think a Just Reward, you know, if there's a ton of Poison Cleanse, you know, maybe it's worth it, and maybe not so much damage that Divine Shield is so necessary. You know, you could run that, or you could drop Imperial Ward for Just Reward. But I just don't think, I don't see the case. I understand why, you know, people might think that it has a ton of value. I'm not convinced. So I hope that that left you feeling like you understand Holy Paladin better, and gave you some confidence. Thank you so much for watching my Dalinar 101 and my how-to on Holy Paladin Season 2. I wish the best of luck for all you new Holy Paladins and for returning Holy Paladins. And you can also catch me. I stream at times. You can catch me when I'm live if you're interested in seeing what I'm up to. Links in my stuff to get to my Twitch. So yeah, thanks for watching and enjoy your Season 2. Bye-bye, folks.